Our nation began with a document that contained these words: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." This is a crucial concept in the formation of America, because what it said is that there is a law above the king. There is a law above the Congress, above the legislature, above any dictator, and that law is the law of God. There are totalitarian regimes in our world, and have been in our world, that say that the king or the government or the emperor is the highest authority, and there is no level above that. And in that case, the government becomes God. Once the government becomes God, you have the ability to say, well, maybe the government wants to deprive you of your life, or deprive you of your liberty, or deprive you of the ability to own property and pursue your happiness. In that case, you can get horrible things like what happened in Germany in the 1930s and 40s, because under the Nazi regime, there was no authority above the government. There was no creator God to point to that has a natural law that protects people. Crucial phrase to remember in everything that we do in America. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator, not the government, with certain unalienable rights, and among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Governments are instituted among men to secure those rights, not to infringe upon them, derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. That's all of us. So if you have a government that is operating without the consent of the governed, you have a dictatorship, you have a totalitarian situation. And again, you can have horrible things happen. So we as Americans, as lovers of freedom, lovers of life, lovers of liberty, we've got to cling to those precepts that are in the Declaration of Independence.
All right, man, this is fantastic. I'm about to introduce a wonderful brother, and we're going to just dialogue a little bit, probably about an important issue, why Holocaust education. Person I'm speaking with today is Rabbi Litvin. He's the rabbi of the Jewish Student Center at the University of Kentucky, serves as chairman of the Kentucky Jewish Council, and serves as the administrator of the Kentucky Educators for Holocaust Studies. And he leads the effort to promote Holocaust education across the Commonwealth of Kentucky. This is an event sponsored by SJS Management, and we hope to do more events like this, educational events like this, in the future. We're here at Launch Louisville, Kentucky, and I want to thank the people, the owners of Launch Louisville, for allowing us to do this here today. Rabbi, we start off with I promoted this as why Holocaust education. So I guess that's the first question I'm just going to put to you. Why is it important that we have that we're educated about the Holocaust?
So in order to answer the question, why Holocaust education, which really is, why is Holocaust education unique? Why isn't it a history course? One first has to understand why the Holocaust itself is unique.
Mm-hmm.
In the early parts of the 20th century, the Turkish government, through a group called the Young Turks, a fascist Islamist group, sought to wipe out an entire people living in their country, the Armenians. And they did so with great success. 20 years later, this was still being discussed, and there wasn't a word to describe the viciousness of such a campaign. Such campaigns had happened before, but there wasn't a word to describe them. It wasn't a massacre. A massacre is a wild attack. They needed a word to describe this kind of devastation. So they invented the word genocide. While they were inventing that word, while they were discussing an atrocity that had happened in the past, an atrocity was taking place in Europe and was being ignored. In the wake of that atrocity, the murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime, the word genocide didn't begin to explain that event. Hitler had a list of how many Jews lived in Kentucky. His plan was first Europe, then Asia, then the rest of the world. For example, with the Armenian genocide, Armenians living in New York were not a threat to the Turkish Empire. They weren't concerned about them. As long as they weren't in their territory, they didn't care. In the uniqueness of the Nazis' attack was that every single Jew had to be wiped out. The systematic focus, Hitler was fighting a three-front war, one in Western Europe, one in Eastern Europe, and one against the Jews in the territory he was conquering. And you can see that in the effort and the money and the capital that went into all three of those fronts equally. So they came up with this word Holocaust. Holocaust is a very poor word to describe it. It comes from actually the Hebrew scripture, a sacrifice that is entirely burnt, given over to God. It connotes sanctity on something which had none, but it was the word chosen to describe this widespread devastation. There had never before and has never since been such an attempt to eradicate a people.
So Rabbi, what you're telling me is that the Nazi, their intent was to kill every single Jewish man, woman, and child in the world.
Correct.
Period.
Period.
Wow.
And they had numbers. They had researched this. This was something they had spent capital on while they were fighting a two-front war. They were researching how many Jews are in North Africa, how many Jews are in Israel, how many Jews are in America, how many Jews are in China, because that was part of their goal.
And even, you said even Kentucky.
Kentucky was on his list, and there weren't many Jews there then.
Wow. So this is part of the reason why Holocaust education, because there's a uniqueness to it, but okay, maybe my response is, well, I'm not Jewish, why should I be concerned?
So I would say Holocaust education is far more important for you than it is for a Jewish person.
Uh-huh.
Number one, there was no one who didn't have a role in the Holocaust. In 1940, President Roosevelt was fully aware of what was going on in the camps, as was Churchill, as was de Gaulle, as was the leaders in Israel, in North Africa, in Russia. Everyone was fully aware of what was going on. They had opportunities to rescue a large number of the later victims of the Holocaust, and they chose not to. When Hitler first rose to power and it became obvious, he had already put out his manifesto of what he planned to do. He referred to Jews as rats and talked about poisoning them to death. America brought up the idea of someone taking in German Jews. And immediately Poland said, if you take German Jews, you have to take Polish Jews too, which made the number about 3.2 million. And immediately the entire world said, no one's interested. When there were opportunities to end the Holocaust during the war, or at least to cut down on the severity of it, to take out the gas chambers, to take out the tracks leading to the death camps, America and Britain chose not to. Every government in the world was either a willing bystander or an active participant in the Holocaust, including the British government, the French government, the American government, the Russian government. They were all fully aware and did nothing. That alone requires that we study this, because history that isn't studied, we're bound to repeat.
Yes.
So recognizing the role we played, recognizing the active blind eye that America took in this event is absolutely necessary for all Americans. On the other hand, seeing what government is capable of, what evil is capable of, when not restrained, is a tremendous lesson for all people in a free world. There's a famous expression by a Protestant minister. When they came for the trade unionists, I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. When they came for the communists, I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist. When they came for the Jews, I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. When they came for me, there was no one left to speak out for me. The audacity of that expression is they came for the Jews first. When they banned Jews from practicing law, when they banned Jews from owning stores, when Jews were attacked, raped, molested in the street, Martin Niemöller, the man who gave that expression, was standing behind Hitler on stage, applauding. It was only when it got to him that he realized maybe some of these choices were poor. It was only when 6 million Jews were slaughtered that he said, oh, something happened to the Jews that I should speak out for. When they were banned from entering public spaces, he didn't even count them on his list of inconveniences. When they were banned from buses, when they were banned from having most jobs, when they were entirely removed from society, he doesn't even put them on his list. It's only at the end of the war, when 6 million Jews are dead, that he says, oh, and they came for the Jews. Maybe they went a little too far there. But when the Nuremberg laws were set up, when it was set that Jews were separate from other people, Niemöller was standing on stage behind Hitler applauding.
You very, very articulate manner. You said, look, there are so many people who are widespread in support. Is education enough? Is education something that can really prevent something like this from happening again?
Lubavitcher Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the foremost Jewish leader of the modern era, said that who, it's worth noting, when Hitler rose to power, lived in Berlin, was a student at Humboldt University, and had to flee to Paris, where he went to the Sorbonne. And then when the Nazis took over France, he again had to flee. And thank God made it to America, where he was the single person most responsible for the resurgence of Jewish life following the Holocaust. He pointed out that Germany was the most educated country in the world. Germany wasn't ignorant backwater. It wasn't like the Armenian genocide. Germany was the country of Wagner, who was a Nazi, of race science, who were Nazis, of von Klimt, the greatest art, the greatest music, the greatest culture in the world was Berlin. The entire world in 1936 gathered in Berlin for the Olympics and encountered far more culture than you would find at that time in London, in New York, in Paris. It was the center of the cosmopolitan world, and it was exactly there that the greatest evil we've seen rose. The Rebbe explained that education isn't enough. Moral education is needed. Any education which isn't based on the fact that we are all B'Tselem Elikim, created by God, in the image of God, as we began with, that our rights are not given to us by government, our rights are given to us by our Creator. Any education that is not based in morality does not help to stop atrocities. Because in fact, as you see, the greatest architects of the Holocaust were very often highly educated people.
Yes.
At the conference to decide what to do with the Jews, the majority of people around the table had a doctorate or a PhD. The majority of the people at the table were highly educated, had been to the finest schools, were regular attendees at the opera, at the great music halls. These were not country bumpkins who were saying they're terrible. These were educated people who were saying these people are subhuman. They're not human, in fact. They're animals and they need to be exterminated. Our country cannot succeed without exterminating the Jews in Kentucky, in New York, in South Africa. These were educated people saying that. And without providing education like this, without concepts like a moment of silence as part of an educational day, where before you begin your education, you think about why we are getting educated, what we want to do with our education. Without concepts like that to add morality to our education system, it does nothing to prevent further atrocities. And that's why specifically, not just as a history course, but as a recognition, pointing out what the Holocaust was and what our what responsibility knowledge of the Holocaust gives us is required as a separate course.
But surely you don't think that something like those kind of horrible atrocities could happen in the United States of America?
Could happen tomorrow.
What? Why do you say that? You're scaring me. Why do you say that?
I say that because the valedictorian at CUNY College University of New York City proudly announced that any organization that associates with Israel is a valid target. That's every Jewish synagogue in the world. She said that before she was valedictorian. You have U.S. Congress members who say things as varied as Jewish space lasers are causing forest fires and Jewish money is controlling politics. You had here in the Commonwealth a representative who had been a state official for 50 years put out a flyer attacking a Jewish candidate for spending money in politics. This is America. People spend money in politics. Right. Had a picture of a Christian child praying, and it said, "Don't let them buy our election." Wow. Without a word of protest from anyone in his party, in the hierarchy, speaking out against that. You've had, in the last year in Kentucky, it's the beginning of September, just about. We've had more anti-Semitic incidents in the last 9 months in Kentucky than we have in the 2 years that followed, and both those years broke records for anti-Semitic hate crimes in Kentucky. You had a mayoral candidate in this city who was nearly assassinated by someone who in the weeks prior spoke out multiple times about how the Jews are controlling politics, the Jews are controlling media, and the evil of the Jews who have stolen from him. So, without a single comment from anyone in his circles on any of those posts, the same people who, following the attempted assassination, said he's really a good kid who made a mistake, did nothing to counter those mistakes when he was saying them publicly. When he posted a picture of the Prime Minister of Israel and blamed the Jews for running the NFL, no one said anything. Not his college mentor, not one of his friends, none of the people who gave glowing character recommendations and said he shouldn't be punished for attempting to assassinate a Jewish candidate, which unquestionably anti-Semitism played a major role in that crime.
No doubt.
No one said anything.
There's no doubt.
A member of the legislature put forth an amendment to a law in the Kentucky State Legislature this year that said Jews should be treated differently under the law, and no one batted an eyelash. It could happen in America, and it can happen in America tomorrow.
You know, Rabbi, as I'm listening to you, I was reflecting a little bit on my personal life, where I think the first time I was ever introduced to the horror of the Holocaust was when my father urged me to read a book. I think it was called "I Cannot Forgive," and it's talking about a person's experience and in one of the death camps and on. From that point forward, I would read things here and there about the Holocaust, and then when my daughter was born, I would teach her things. We actually visited a synagogue, and I would talk to her a lot about the books of Moses and things of that nature. And then one day when she was, her mother and I had divorced, and her and her mother and her stepsister went to a trip in Florida. And when they got back, my ex-wife scared the dickens out of me. She called me. I was like, I ain't got no more money. But anyway, she called me to say my daughter insisted on going to a Holocaust museum in Florida, just out of the blue. Insisted on it. So I asked her, I was proud of her. And we're talking in dialogue, and I told her, well, we're going to read about Anne Frank, and we're going to go to a play on Anne Frank and all. And one thing I said to her, I think it really stuck with her, I said, we're Christians, and we cannot say that we're Christians and be anti-Semitic. So you can't, that's not acceptable. You just can't be. You're lying to the world, you're lying to yourself. Do you think the Christian church should do more, or are they doing enough as far as Holocaust education is concerned and battling anti-Semitism is concerned?
Well, we first would have to recognize that there are branches within the church that were active participants in the Holocaust. Primarily the Catholic Church, which was fully aware, which gave forgiveness to Nazis while they were killing Jews, and which in the aftermath of the Holocaust helped smuggle Nazis out of the country to escape justice. It's worth noting that the last pope served in the Hitler Youth, and the current pope famously said he would happily give forgiveness to any Nazi in Argentina. That has never actually been dealt with. The fact that Pope Pius was fully aware from the earliest days of what was happening and had the power to speak out, had the pulpit to make an impact and chose not to. It's also worth noting you have here in Louisville the headquarters of the PCUSA, the Presbyterian Church USA, who as recently as this year accused the Jews of having slaves in Israel. I've been to Israel, there's no slaves. And attempted to use the sacred memory of Dr. King as a cudgel against the Jewish people, accusing them of multiple atrocities, and then using the Holocaust as a cudgel, that Jews of all people, because they had these atrocities, should be held to a different standard. So before we can talk about the positive impact the church can make, we have to talk about the branches of the church that are currently making a negative impact. Having said that, there certainly is a positive impact the church can make. The church has a tremendous pulpit, especially here in America, and have a responsibility to point out that if indeed they are following the founder of the church, they are following someone who would have been murdered in the Holocaust. 2 years ago, I convinced a Holocaust survivor in Lexington to share her story publicly for the first time. And she spoke of the fear of hiding in Berlin during the entire Holocaust. Following the Holocaust, her family came out of hiding, and her parents put her into a public school in Germany. She was the only Jewish kid in the school, and the vast majority of teachers had been members of the Nazi Party during the war. And in December, the teacher told the story of the crucifixion and then asked, "Who do you think was responsible?" and called on this young girl. "Tell me who's responsible for his murder." Now, she had never been exposed to Christian culture before. She had grown up literally in a closet. So she did the math in her head, trying to get the right answer, and she said, well, he was Jewish, and he was murdered. Was it the Nazis? And that was obviously not the answer the teacher was looking for. But the idea that one could abandon the people where the origins of the faith are clearly found,
Yes.
while claiming any allegiance to those people, I think is a logical fallacy. In addition, above all else, God calls us to be moral. Ignoring evil is an amoral act. Not doing all we can to stop evil is an amoral act. So I don't think one can call themselves the followers of a moral God if they don't do what they can to stop immorality, which includes providing a moral education.
You know, Rabbi, when I introduced you, it says here that you're leading the effort to promote Holocaust education, you know, throughout the Commonwealth of Kentucky. You know, if somebody at a school, community center, wherever it might be, they're interested in you coming in and speaking about the Holocaust, how would they, I mean, is that something they can do? And if so, how would they reach you?
So one of the hats I wear, well, I'm always wearing this hat. One of the hats I wear in the community is I'm currently lead educator and administrator for Kentucky Educators for Holocaust Studies, or CAHUS. CAHUS has many projects they do. They're currently working to try and get some funding from the state and private partners to open the first Holocaust Museum here in Kentucky. And they also provide speakers for public schools across Kentucky or private schools. So if there is an audience that wants a lecture on the Holocaust to either children, teens, or adults, CAHUS will provide it. And if one isn't available, I will make myself available for it. They can get KEHOSoffice@gmail.com. And we're easily findable on the internet. But I work together with Fred Whitaker, who is a brilliant Holocaust educator, and his students from St. Francis to codify an executive order into law maybe 6 years ago now. So Holocaust education is mandated for public schools in Kentucky. The act was called the Ann Klein, and Ann Klein was a Holocaust survivor who advocated heavily for the original executive order, and who had since passed away. So it was named for her, and it was also named for a Holocaust survivor who had championed it at that time. He and I grew extremely close trying to promote Holocaust education. And while the law was mandated to all schools across Kentucky, the fact is very few do.
Okay.
And many don't have the ability to, don't have the knowledge base or the pedagogy in this extremely difficult subject to convey it properly to children.
Okay.
Which is why, so Fred Gross, who was the second survivor, spent a great deal of his time traveling around Kentucky speaking to classrooms, speaking to students.
Okay.
He passed last year. As Kentucky loses more and more of its Holocaust survivor, and the world lose more and more of its Holocaust survivor, this becomes more and more important, more and more crucial to establish. So the reason that Kentucky Educators for Holocaust Studies was originally made was within the mandate the state gave to provide those resources to schools, to community centers, to youth groups, to men's groups, to have that frame of education.
Okay.
So I highly encourage people to get in contact with us. We're very happy to provide an educator. There is wide sponsorships to cover costs, and you are providing your students or your group with an incredible educational and moral need.
Yes.
To have the basis to raise a moral voice.
All right, well, Rabbi, we're going to conclude with that, and we'll make sure that all that contact information you gave us, that we'll do that. And I just want to really encourage people, please contact the rabbi. He means it when he says, if you're interested in doing something at your church, your community center, wherever it might be, he will make it happen. Some way or another, he will make it happen. And I think if we listen to him and listen to this recording, not once, not twice, but several times, really listen to him. Every last one of us in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, we should be responding. We should be saying, hey, I got to do this here. I want you at my school, whatever it might be. We got to be doing this. Rabbi, thank you.
Thank you for having us.